Working on a project car can feel like an emotional roller coaster. Sometimes the car is dead reliable and everything goes as planned, and other times it might seem like the car literally will not stop breaking. The TT has been very busy keeping me busy working on its issues. And this story starts right after the last one wrapped up. We converted this car from narrowband to wideband. Immediately after, we were requested to do an idle log. The log was recorded and sent off, but the story doesn't end there. They sent us another revision already, so we're going to go ahead and toss that in the car now and make sure everything's good to go. So far, so good. The guys over at Motoza immediately sent me another tune for the car. For some reason in the log, the wideband signal wasn't changing whatsoever, meaning our wideband conversion wasn't really complete. Sure, the car was running on a wideband ECU, but to run properly, it needs an accurate wideband signal. And for some reason, we were not getting that. So the first step was to simply re-upload a new tune and see if that was the issue. A super easy first check, or at least it should have been. The upload itself was just fine and the tune was good, but something was messing with the log. At this point, it could have been a number of things. With the way these zeros were popping in and out, it reminded me of something electrical. That, or our used ECU, was no good.
That's definitely not right.
We're supposed to go get some driving logs, so here we go. Nothing too crazy, just around the neighborhood. Well, the car survived the loop, which is good, because if it didn't, we'd have even bigger problems. I'm gonna send the log to Motoza and we'll go based on what they said, but honestly the car drives completely fine. Sure, the car felt fine, but according to the logs, it wasn't. The wideband signal was still not changing. So, you're faced with a system that has an issue, and there's quite a few things it could be. All three of the parts that we installed could have been faulty, especially a used ECU with unknown history. Or maybe we just messed the wiring up. Either way, where do you start? Well, if you're working with cool enough people, maybe they'll be more than willing to send you every piece of that puzzle, so you can properly find the issue. Motoza was kind enough to send over 2 different used ECUs. If the ECU happens to be the culprit, we're covered. They also sent over a brand new dongle and an entirely new wiring harness. In other words, we have everything we could possibly need to find this issue. So now it's just a matter of going through the order of what's most likely. I spoke with the tuner for a while and we decided that the used ECU with the unknown history was the best place to start. And it's the quickest to test. All we've got to do is swap the ECUs, start the car up, and do another idle log. If the wideband magically starts reading, we know the ECU we originally started with was faulty. Seems like an awesome place to start. First ECU done, no dice, that didn't change anything, so my guess is maybe it's the harness we have, or one of the connections we put in is an issue, or maybe both of these ECUs are bad. So we're gonna try that third ECU next. We're trying to get the AFR actual to actually change, and it's not, so we'll figure it out. We took the second ECU out and replaced it with the third. At this point, it was getting unlikely that the ECUs were the issue. The chances of one bad ECU is decent, but multiple, I don't know about that one. And turns out that hunch was right. This ECU didn't change a thing. So to keep things consistent, I reinstalled the original wideband ECU, since as of now we have no real reason to suspect that it was the issue. In doing all this testing, I found out pretty quickly that my old red Motoza dongle was actually a separate issue. Kinda like an old pair of wired headphones, if you bent the cable in a specific way, it would cause zeros on the log. I've had this one for about 4 years and 2 cars, so makes sense. Going forward, I'm just gonna use the new one though. At this point, the only 2 realistic culprits were the wiring harness itself or how we wired it. The tuner and I spent a long time looking over the wires, rewatching the video, and eventually we noticed the 2 wires that we installed were actually reversed. Black wire goes to 71 and the brown wire goes to 52. Well, it looks like I accidentally reversed those. Goes to show you just how annoying these pins can be. These kind of things are very common when working on a project car and trying new things. It's how you learn. While this can be frustrating, it's also super satisfying when you do end up finding the issue. So when I started this last log and saw the wideband values changing, I couldn't be more excited. After this, the car honestly felt quite good, and I was happy to know that I was safe to drive it again now that it was reading its own wideband signal. I was planning to start the vinyl wrap since the weather was going to be great the next weekend. But instead, this car decided it was a good idea to try and give me a heart attack. The car was making a horrible metal-on-metal tapping noise right at about 2500 RPMs, only under throttle. As the RPMs increased, so did the speed of the noise, and this is never a fun sound to hear, especially after you made a very dramatic change to a car, like swapping the device that controls its air-fuel ratio. I was pretty nervous here. I was shaking the engine, hoping, desperately trying to find something that was making that tapping noise. I would have been happy with anything. Just please don't let this engine die. That would ruin all my plans for the time being. I couldn't find anything on the top end, so I decided to get the car up on ramps and check underneath, frantically hoping it was a simple fix. The knock changed with the speed of the engine, and it was happening in neutral. In other words, it was utterly terrifying. I crept under the car, looking for anything. I would have stayed here forever looking, but thankfully, it only took a couple minutes. The clips holding the heat shield on had snapped due to age, and the heat shield was clanking against the downpipe. In other words, maybe this was the source of our knock. The engine vibrates at different frequencies at certain RPMs, so it would shake the downpipe. I didn't have any of these exact clips, but I really wanted to test this, so I decided to bend some mechanic wire around the place where the clips used to be. I clamped it down as hard as I could, and I'm thinking this will be a perfect way to test if this is the actual issue. It's definitely not a pretty solution, but it does work for the time being. After making doubly sure this wasn't going anywhere, I decided to start the car up and go for a drive. Like I was saying, going for a drive. If we don't hear the knock at the same situations that we were hearing it, we fix the issue and we can order those clips. And if we do, we might have a much bigger issue. Or at least that's what I was telling myself. This kind of noise is never a good one to hear in a car.
That was it. Yes! Yes! I'm so excited. Oh, that's so good.
I'm happy to say that it looks like our idea was right. This car has a mind of its own sometime, and it is well determined to scare me half to death. I am so grateful that this was something so simple. An engine isn't exactly quite as cheap as those clips, so I'd much rather be buying those. Working on this car feels like a roller coaster sometimes, at least emotionally. That one was a big drop for sure, but with it fixed, we're good to get some power logs for Motoza. Seems like the car is working a lot better than it was. We are definitely getting a wideband reading, which is definitely nice. I am excited to see what the tuner says about the log, and we'll go from there. The TT is like the little boy who cried wolf. It gave me 2 issues, which seemed really scary at first, but ended up being nothing more than simple fixes. There's one tiny issue with that comparison, though. In that story, the wolf does eventually show up. Well, we heard back from the tuner, about the power log, that is. The car might actually be hurt. You see, this car has been tuned to reach about 20 psi and hold it. And it does reach 20 psi, but as soon as it does, it very quickly tapers off to about 12 and stays there. So either we have a massive vacuum leak, or this nearly 170,000 mile turbo is getting ready to retire. What wonderful timing. The log shows all of the electrical readings from the sensors in the car, and with those we can eliminate a lot of systems. The N75 is commanding 100% duty cycle, we're just not getting it. So really, if there is a boost leak, the only way for us to find it is with a pressure tester. We did just have a couple pipes off to swap the wideband, so maybe it was just one of those. I started there, checking everything that I knew that I touched, in the hopes that maybe something just wasn't tightened. No dice though. If this car were completely stock, I'd start by just replacing all of the vacuum lines with silicone ones, which are less prone to tear. But this car already has silicone lines, so the likelihood of one of those failing is pretty low. In other words, I determined that the best course of action was to pressure test the car. I definitely thought we would find a vacuum leak, but the real question was, is that vacuum leak the cause of all these symptoms? Or is that just an additional issue? Until we find one, we won't know for sure. I set my air compressor to put out a steady 20 psi, since that's what we were supposed to be holding. I undid the oil cap and I clamped off the line from the turbo inlet pipe that heads towards the PCV. That way, all we're testing is the actual boost hoses. Also, this green pressure tester is old and the gauge on it does not work. So when you see it read 0 psi, that's not what we're going off of. We know the air compressor is putting out 20 psi, so we're just listening for any sort of a hissing noise, cluing us in to where the leak might be. Well, the good news is you can definitely hear one. The bad news is we have to find it. It sounded like it was coming near the intake manifold, so I undid the wiring clip so I could reach underneath it. And then I started the pressure test all over again, hoping to find even closer to where it is. I want you to listen closely when I move the Allen wrench near the second injector. It seems like not one, but 2 of our injectors are leaking out of the O-rings. If only I had everything to fix this already. I not only have new O-rings, but I actually have a set of upgraded 550cc injectors. So rather than just replacing the O-rings and calling it good, why don't we go ahead and just install these upgraded injectors? We'll have to retune the car for these anyways, so we might as well do it now. These also probably look familiar. I got these the same time I got the original wideband kit, and you probably saw them in the background of that video. And thankfully, they're super easy to install. First things first, we need to take the harness off as well as the fuel rail. The wiring harness connects to a knock sensor, but once this is unplugged, you're good to just unplug each of the injectors. And the rail itself is held on simply with 2 Allen bolts. And if you want even more detail on that, I talk about it a lot in my intake manifold video. With the rail out, we're able to pivot it over the side, and specifically, I put it over this bucket. To replace these injectors, we need to pull them out of the rail. There's clips on the back of each of these holding them in place. But you might be wondering, what's the bucket for? Well, the fuel rail is full of exactly what you would think: fuel. The first one has just a little bit of pressure behind it, but after that each one pops out and there's just a little bit of fuel that dribbles out. It's not going to continuously spray on you, there's just that first little bit, so no worries there. With the old injectors out, it's really just as simple as popping in the new injector. Each of these come with new top and bottom O-rings and they're ready to just be snapped into place. I kept them the same orientation as the other ones, and all in all this was maybe a 10-minute swap. Very different from the S4. Comparing these injectors to the old injectors, I will say they fit a lot better into the new manifold. Maybe that was actually part of the issue. The old ones seemed to just be a little bit too long to properly seat themselves in the intake manifold holes, so I think this was definitely the right call. We can't just plug these injectors in, however. They're a 4-pin and the stock car needs a 2-pin, so there's these little plastic adapters we need. But once they're in place, we're good to reinstall everything like normal. And once everything's in place, we're ready to pressure test the car for one final time. I connected the hose and I listened. I'm happy to say there weren't any more boost leaks. So in order to really test if this was the issue, the final thing we had to do was upload the tune for the 550cc injectors and go do another log. I really hope that was it. Once again, huge shout out to Motoza for always helping me with the tuning process. I'm always going to recommend them and they've been very helpful to me. This car has taken us through quite the journey this episode, so I really hope that this was the main issue. I got the new tune set up and we should be all good to start the car and see if that fixes the issue. Do we gain any benefit from the 550cc injectors? Kinda depends. If we want to run E85 on the KO4, we can now technically do so. We probably want to check over the fuel lines and whatnot, but what we're going to do now is try to fire the car up. I'm expecting it to misfire the first few times we start it up, specifically because we emptied all the fuel in the rail, so it's going to be pretty uneven pressure-wise for the first crank and for a little bit afterwards. So we're going to fire it up a couple times, get it to hopefully be happy with the new tune. This tune is built for these injectors and it's nothing really that different from what we had, so the car should feel exactly the same, and if it doesn't, we've done something wrong. Sick. We didn't actually have a misfire whatsoever, so I think we're good to go test drive. It also started up way faster than normal, so that leak could have been a bigger issue than we ever realized. Cool, we fixed it. The moment of truth. There weren't any more boost leaks, so if the turbo was still behaving like it was, we might need a replacement sooner than later. I'm keeping my fingers crossed. The car sure felt a lot better. That boost leak definitely made it happier, but I can't really judge if we fixed the turbo issue based specifically on driving it. For that, we're gonna have to see what the tuner says with the log. Do stories need a happy ending in order to be worth telling? I honestly think about that question pretty frequently, or at least probably a lot more than most people would. The boost leak was an issue the car was facing. One issue. The log looked a lot better than it did before, but the turbo was doing the same exact thing. It was building boost a lot later than it should have, and it was very quickly unable to hold that max boost. The guys over at Motoza have seen a lot of logs, and through those logs, what they can do is make comparisons with other cars that are having issues. And the TT currently has all of the issues of a turbo that is getting so old it's struggling to do what it used to be able to. So even though the car is running well, and it's making boost, it's not able to hold it. And in other words, the turbo has 2 feet out the door. Yeah. definitely not how I wanted to end this episode. In fact, I was hoping to make this episode the first of the wrap series. But, all things considered, it sounds like this car has other plans for its future. I've said this before, but I also wish there were more options for turbos. There aren't really any kits anymore. A fully custom build is something that would be my #1 choice, but given the time crunch and the lack of a shop to build it in, it gets tough. We'll do that someday, but we might need to pivot for the time being. I've got a pretty solid idea in my back pocket, but I want to hear what you guys think would be best. So, let me know. Thank you so very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, consider dropping a like and subscribing for more. It's the best way you can stay up to date and help support me and the videos I make. I have a ton planned for the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Once again, thank you. Have a wonderful day.